You open your eyes. The heat is already oppressive, even in the early morning hours. You stand at the edge of a dirt road that stretches through the heart of Torreón, Coahuila, in the year 1911. The sun has not yet crested the distant Sierra Madre Mountains, but the air carries the promise of another brutal day. Fine dust coats your lips. Somewhere nearby a rooster crows. This city was built from nothing, from desert and sand and the stubborn refusal of those who came here to fail. You see it around you now, the modest wooden buildings, the canvas awnings stretched over storefronts, the single rail line that connects this place to the wider world. Torreón is young. It is only 40 years old, a child of the railways, born from the iron will of men who believed they could conquer the desert. But it is not only Mexicans who built this city. You walk through streets that smell of wood smoke and bread, of horses and earth. A woman passes you, her hair tucked beneath a cloth, carrying a clay pot of water. A man in a straw hat leads a donkey loaded with wooden crates. Children chase each other between the buildings, their laughter high and bright. And then you notice the signs. Above one storefront, painted in bold red and gold, hangs a sign in 2 languages, Spanish and Chinese. A small bell chimes as someone pushes through the beaded curtain into the interior. Inside, you glimpse shelves stacked high with bolts of cloth, ceramic jars of preserved vegetables, dried fish hanging from hooks. The shopkeeper, a man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers, counts coins on an abacus, the beads clicking with a sound like distant rain. This is a Chinese grocery store, and it is one of dozens. You continue walking, and you begin to see it everywhere. Chinese handwriting on shop fronts. Chinese characters carved into wooden signs. The smell of ginger and star anise mingling with the dust. These people came from across the Pacific, from the villages and towns of Guangdong province, from a land 10,000 miles away. They crossed an ocean and then crossed a continent to arrive in this furnace of sand, and they built something remarkable. A Chinese bank. An actual bank, with an ornate facade of carved stone, its doors flanked by brass lanterns that catch the morning light. Merchants in long robes emerge, paper documents tucked into their sleeves. They conduct business in Cantonese, in Spanish, in the pidgin tongue that develops when cultures collide. A Chinese-run laundry. Steam rises from open windows, carrying the clean scent of soap and pressed cotton. The sign above the door reads, in both languages, fresh laundry, same-day service. A Chinese restaurant. You catch a glimpse through the doorway of red-lacquered tables, of hanging lanterns, of men playing mahjong in the corner, the tiles clicking like bones. And beyond the Chinese quarter you see the rest of Torreón. The tram line that connects the city to its neighbor, Gómez Palacio, across the Rio Nazas. A tram built and operated by Chinese hands. The orchards and vegetable gardens that ring the city, producing food for the entire region, tended by Chinese farmers. The modest homes where Chinese men have settled, many of them married now to Mexican women, their children running barefoot through the dusty streets. The Chinese community in Torreón is not the largest in Mexico, but it is the most prosperous. You feel the dust swirl around your ankles. The sun is climbing higher now, and with it, the temperature. In a few hours, the streets will be nearly empty, everyone retreating to the shade, waiting for the worst of the heat to pass. But for now, in these early hours, the city is alive. A street vendor sells skewers of meat from a cart. A man in a wrinkled suit hurries past, newspaper under his arm. Somewhere, a woman sings a corrido, her voice drifting from an open window. A song about love, about loss, about the hardships of life in the desert. You stand in the middle of it all, a ghost in the year 1911, and you feel the strange peace of a city at rest. This peace will not last. The year is 1906, 5 years before the violence. You stand at the edge of Torreón as a different kind of traveler arrives. He comes by train as all travelers do, the iron horse that built this city, that made it possible to cross the desert, that connected the remote corners of Mexico to the wider world. The train station is modest. A wooden platform, a ticket office, a water tower that belches steam into the dry air. He steps down from the passenger car, and you see him clearly for the first time. He is not young. His beard is gray, streaked with white, and his robes are the deep blue of a scholar, embroidered with subtle patterns that catch the light. His eyes are sharp, assessing, taking in everything around him, the dust, the buildings, the people, the potential. This is Kang Yue, and he has traveled a very long way to be here. Kang Yue is one of the most famous philosophers in China. He was an advisor to the emperor, a reformer who believed that China must change or perish, that the ancient ways were not enough to resist the foreigners who now circled the Middle Kingdom like wolves. He led the 100 Days Reform of 1898, a desperate attempt to modernize China, to adopt Western technology and Western ideas while preserving Chinese values. The Empress Dowager Cixi crushed the reform movement. Kang Yue barely escaped with his life. Since then, he has wandered. He has traveled through North America, through Southeast Asia, through any place where Chinese people have settled, seeking a new home for his people, a place where they might build a utopia far from the decay of the Qing Empire. Now he stands in Torreón, Coahuila, Mexico, and he sees something that catches his eye. The desert, the railways, the potential. You watch as Kang Yue walks through the city, accompanied by local officials who clearly hope to impress him, to secure his investment. He examines the water table, the mineral deposits, the quality of the soil. He speaks with Chinese merchants who have already established themselves here, men who arrived decades ago, who built the first shops and the first laundries, who sent letters back home describing a land where an industrious man might make his fortune. Kang Yue listens. He nods. He makes notes in a small book, his brush strokes precise and economical. What did he see in Torreón? What convinced him that this dusty outpost in the Mexican desert was worth his investment? Perhaps he saw the railway which made transportation possible. Perhaps he saw the water of the Rio Nazas, which could be diverted to irrigate fields. Perhaps he saw the growing population, the demand for goods and services, the opportunity to build something from nothing. Whatever he saw, Kang Yue invested. He put money into Chinese-owned businesses. He encouraged other Chinese merchants to follow him, to pour their savings into this distant city. He believed that Torreón could become a model, a place where Chinese people could thrive, could prove their worth, could build a better future. You watch him board the train again, heading east, returning to his wanderings. But his influence remains. The Chinese community in Torreón grows stronger. New businesses open. New families arrive. The bank flourishes. The grocery stores expand. The laundry business booms. And in the years that follow, the city changes. But Kang Youwei's dream will curdle into nightmare. And the men who come after him, the ones who invested their fortunes in Torreón, will see it all burn. To understand what happens in 1911, you must understand what came before. You must understand the Porfiriato. For 34 years, from 1876 until 1911, Mexico was ruled by a single man, Porfirio Diaz, a general who rose to power on the promise of stability, who brought a kind of brutal peace to a country that had known nothing but chaos for 50 years. Diaz sits for his portrait now, and you see him clearly. The thick mustache, the steely gaze, the medals on his chest. He is 70 years old in 1911, and he has been president for so long that most Mexicans have never known another way. The economy has grown slowly. Foreign capital pours in: American, British, French, building railways, opening mines, establishing factories. The cities expand. Mexico is modernizing, or so it seems. But the wealth flows upward. The great haciendas grow larger, swallowing the small farms. The peasants work in the fields for starvation wages. The indigenous people are pushed to the margins, their languages suppressed, their traditions derided as backward. And imported labor is brought in to do the work that Mexicans will not do. This is how the Chinese arrived. They came initially to build the railways, the same railways that connect Torreón to the world. You see them in your mind's eye, hundreds of men with picks and shovels, hacking a path through the Sierra Madre, laying rails that will carry the trains that will carry the goods that will build the cities. They came from Guangdong province, from a land of rice paddies and crowded cities, from a China that was being torn apart by famine and foreign intervention. They came because they had no choice. The Chinese who came to Mexico in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were not adventurers. They were not conquerors. They were refugees, fleeing a homeland that could not support them, seeking any opportunity to survive. They signed contracts that bound them to labor for years, contracts that functioned as a form of indentured servitude. They worked in the heat and the dust, in the mines and the fields, alongside Mexican workers who were often just as poor, just as desperate. But when the contracts ended, some of the Chinese stayed. And what they built with their own hands. The laundries, the grocery stores, the small restaurants and the modest shops. They started at the bottom, doing the work that no one else wanted, washing clothes, selling vegetables, running errands. And slowly, through industry and thrift, through the peculiar genius of the Chinese merchant, they began to prosper. You see it in the numbers. In 1900, there are perhaps a few hundred Chinese in Torreón. By 1911, there are more than 1,000. They control a disproportionate share of the city's retail trade. They operate the bank. They own the tram line. They feed the city. And this success breeds resentment. The Chinese work hard. They save their money. They send portions of their earnings back to China to support families they have not seen in years. They marry Mexican women, not because they are unwelcome among Chinese women, but because Chinese women were rare in Mexico, and because love does not obey the boundaries of race or nation. The Mexican men who see their women walking arm in arm with Chinese men feel something twist in their chests. The Mexican merchants who see their customers patronizing Chinese shops feel their profits slip away. The Mexican workers who see Chinese foremen earning more than they do feel the hot flare of envy. In the Mexico of Porfirio Diaz, this resentment has nowhere to go. The authorities are firm. The police keep order. The The Chinese community pays its taxes and keeps its head down. But change is coming. In 1910, Francisco I. Madero calls for revolution. He says that Diaz must go, that Mexico must have real democracy, that the common people must have a voice. And across the country, those words find fertile ground. The Porfiriato begins to crumble. And with it, the fragile peace that has protected the Chinese community. You stand in the central plaza of Torreón as the year 1910 draws to a close. The air is thick with something more than dust. There is electricity here, a sense of anticipation, of something about to break. Francisco I. Madero has issued his plan of San Luis Potosí, calling for the overthrow of Porfirio Diaz. He is a rancher's son from Coahuila, the same state as Torreón. He is not a radical. He believes in democracy, in the rule of law, in the rights of property. But he has touched a nerve. Across Mexico, men are taking up arms. They call themselves Maderistas, followers of Madero. They gather in the hills, in the remote villages, in the great haciendas that have grown fat on the labor of the poor. They drill with whatever weapons they can find, old muskets, hunting rifles, machetes ground from agricultural tools into something sharper, more deadly. And they have a message. Diaz must go. The dictatorship must end. The people must be heard. In the cities, the message is quieter but no less intense. It is expressed in newspapers, in pamphlets, in the conversations that happen behind closed doors. It is expressed in the speeches given on the anniversaries of Mexican independence, on the 16th of September, when the spirit of Miguel Hidalgo is invoked and the crowd is urged to throw off the chains of tyranny. You listen to one such speech, given in a packed auditorium in Torreón on the night of September 16, 1910. The speaker is a local man, educated, passionate, his voice rising and falling like a wave. He speaks of liberty. He speaks of dignity. He speaks of the common people who have been exploited for too long, who have been kept in ignorance and poverty while a privileged few grow fat on their labor. And then, almost as an afterthought, he mentions the Chinese. The Chinese are taking our jobs, he says. The Chinese are marrying our women. The Chinese are sending our money out of the country, enriching themselves while we starve. The Chinese are foreigners, interlopers, a cancer in the body of Mexico. The crowd murmurs. Some nod. Some shift uncomfortably. But the seed has been planted. The date is May 5, 1911, 8 days before the massacre. The city of Gómez Palacio lies across the river from Torreón, connected by the tram line that the Chinese built and operate. It is a smaller city, more provincial, its streets narrower, its buildings more cramped. But it is close enough to Torreón that what happens here will spread. You stand at the edge of an open-air gathering, a kind of political rally that has drawn men from across the region. The afternoon sun beats down. Dust swirls in small tornadoes between the feet of the crowd. Someone has erected a wooden platform at one end, draped with red and white bunting. On the platform, a man is speaking. His name is Jesus C. Flores. You see him clearly. A man in his 40s, lean and hungry-looking, with a thin mustache and eyes that burn with conviction. He is not a politician, not officially. He is a laborer, a working man, one of the many who feel that the system has failed them. But he has a gift for words, for mobilizing the crowd, for giving voice to resentments that have long festered in silence. Flores speaks first about the revolution, about the need to overthrow Diaz, about the glory that awaits Mexico when the dictator is gone. The crowd roars its approval. They wave banners. They shout slogans. And then he turns to the Chinese. The change is immediate. The tone shifts. The words become sharper, more personal, more venomous. Listen to me, Flores says. Look around you. Who runs the grocery stores? Who washes your clothes? Who takes your money to a foreign country? It is the Chinese. They come here, they work for pennies, they undercut our businesses, they marry our women. They send gold back to China while our children go hungry. They are parasites. They are leeches. They are destroying Mexico from within. The crowd is silent now, listening intently. And then Flores says the words that will echo through history. It would be best to exterminate them. The words hang in the air, poisonous, undeniable. You see the effect on the faces around you. Some are shocked. Some are thoughtful. Some are already nodding, already calculating, already imagining a world without the Chinese, a world where the jobs and the shops and the money return to Mexican hands. This is the moment. This is the spark. Flores did not invent anti-Chinese prejudice. It existed before him in Mexico and everywhere else Chinese people had settled. But he gave it a voice. He gave it legitimacy. He gave the mob permission to act. 8 days later, the Maderista army arrives at Torreon's gates. And the mob is ready. Before the violence begins, the Chinese community tries to save itself. You hold in your hands a piece of paper, a circular, issued by the Torreón Chinese Merchants and Laborers Society, dated May 12, 1911, the day before the fighting starts. The text is in Chinese characters, brushstrokes precise and elegant, but someone has translated it for you. This is what it says. To all Chinese merchants and laborers in Torreón, there is great danger. Revolutionary forces are approaching. The situation is uncertain. We advise all Chinese to remain calm, to stay in your homes and businesses, to make no resistance, even if attacked. Do not arm yourselves. Do not provoke the soldiers. Trust that order will be restored and that justice will prevail. This was the response of the Chinese community to the rising tide of hatred. Not defiance, not resistance, submission. They had no choice. The Chinese in Mexico had no embassy to protect them, no gunboats in the harbor, no army at their backs. They were alone. They had survived by making themselves useful, by being industrious and peaceful and unthreatening. They had survived by not making trouble, by not complaining, by accepting the insults and the small humiliations as the price of survival in a foreign land. And so, when the circular was distributed, the Chinese of Torreón read it, nodded their heads, and resolved to do as they were told. They would not fight back. They would hide. They would hope. You see them now in the hours before the violence begins. Chinese merchants closing their shops early, pulling down the shutters, bolting the doors. Chinese families gathering in their homes, whispering to each other in Cantonese, trying not to let the children see their fear. Chinese workers on the outskirts of the city, in the orchards and the gardens, continuing their labor even as the distant sound of gunfire grows closer. They have no weapons. Even if they wanted to fight, they have no weapons. The circular told them not to buy any. The merchants who could have afforded guns chose not to, believing, hoping that neutrality would save them. It will not. May 13, 1911. The fighting begins at dawn. You stand on a ridge overlooking Torreón, and you see the two armies arrayed before you. Between them lies the city, its buildings suddenly fragile, its streets empty, its people huddled in their homes waiting for the storm to pass. The federal forces number about 800 men. They are the army of President Diaz, the soldiers who have kept the peace, or at least the appearance of peace, for 3 decades. They are dug in around the city, manning barricades and trenches, their rifles ready. Their commander is General Emiliano Logero, a career officer who has spent his life serving the Porfirio dictatorship. Against them stand 4,500 Maderistas, the revolutionary army of Francisco Madero. They are not a regular army. They are farmers and workers and bandits, men who picked up guns because they had nothing else, because the revolution promised something better. They are led by Emilio Madero, the brother of Francisco, a man who rode north from Chihuahua at the head of this force, gathering men as he went. You watch the first assault. The Maderistas come in waves, on foot and on horseback, their banners flying, their battle cries echoing across the desert. The Federals open fire. The crack of rifles splits the air. Men fall. The advance falters, reforms, comes again. This is not a battle between equals. The Federals are outnumbered more than 5 to 1. They have better weapons, better discipline, better position, but numbers matter in war, and the Maderistas have the numbers. The fighting lasts through the day and into the night. You hear the constant crackle of small arms fire, the deeper boom of artillery, the screams of wounded men calling for water, for help, for their mothers. The desert air carries the smell of smoke and blood. And in the city the people wait. The Chinese wait. May 14, 1911. Late night. The battle has turned against the Federals. Their lines are wavering, their ammunition running low. The Maderistas have pushed into the outskirts of the city, and every street becomes a killing ground. General Logero makes his decision. Under cover of darkness, the Federal garrison begins to withdraw. They slip out of their positions, leaving their barricades and trenches, moving quietly through the back streets toward the railway station. Some go on foot, some go on horseback, some pile into the few trains that still run, their whistles screaming in the night as they carry the soldiers away from the doomed city. By morning, Torreón will be defenseless. But General Logero faces a problem. He cannot take all his men at once. He cannot evacuate everyone who wants to leave. And some of those left behind, the Chinese community especially, are regarded by the victorious Maderistas as potential enemies, as supporters of the old regime, as rich targets ripe for plunder. What happens next is disputed. Later, the Revolutionary Tribunal will hear testimony that General Logero, before he fled, distributed weapons to the Chinese, arming them so that they might defend themselves, or so that they might be blamed for any violence that followed. Logero denies this. No weapons salesman in Torreón will admit to selling firearms to the Chinese. But the story spreads anyway. The Maderistas will believe it, and the mob that gathers in the early hours of May 15th will use it as justification for what comes next. You watch the last Federal troops board the trains. The steam hisses, the wheels begin to turn, and in the darkness, a city is left to its fate. May 15th, 1911. 6 o'clock in the morning. The Maderistas enter Torreón. You stand at the edge of the city as Emilio Madero rides in at the head of his army. He is younger than you expected, perhaps 30 years old, with a thin beard and earnest eyes. He sits his horse with the confidence of a man who has won a victory, who has toppled a dictatorship, who believes he is on the right side of history. Behind him come his soldiers, thousands of them, their weapons gleaming in the early light. Some are still bloodied from the fighting. Some are grinning, elated by their victory. Some are silent, their eyes already scanning the city for targets. And trailing behind the army comes something else. The mob. They emerge from the houses and the alleys, drawn by the promise of opportunity. They are men and women and children, residents of Torreón who see the departure of the Federals as a signal, as permission, as the beginning of something they have been waiting for. Some carry clubs, some carry knives, some carry nothing but their rage. Among them you recognize faces from the rally 8 days ago, from the speeches, from the murmurings of resentment that have poisoned the air for months. They carry a Mexican flag, red and white and green, and they wave it like a battle standard. A herb seller, a woman who has sold chamomile and mint in the market for years, clutches the flag and screams, "Let's kill the Chinese!" The cry is taken up. Kill the Chinese! Kill the Chinese! It begins. The mob pours into the Chinese district. You see it happen in 100 different ways, 1,000 different small atrocities. You cannot look away. You cannot unsee it. The Chinese bank. A group of men breaks through the doors, their shoulders slamming against the wood until it splinters. Inside, the clerks, Chinese men in Western suits, raise their hands in surrender, but it does not matter. The mob drags them from behind the counters, beats them to the floor, tramples them underfoot. They seize the cash boxes, the documents, the gold and silver that the community has entrusted to this institution. They haul it outside into the street, whooping with triumph, splitting the money among themselves. The vault door, iron, heavy, designed to withstand exactly this kind of assault, is broken open with dynamite. The explosion tears through the morning air, and when the smoke clears, there is nothing left but an empty hole in the wall and scattered coins glinting in the dust. The grocery stores. The shelves are emptied in minutes. Men grab armfuls of rice, of noodles, of dried fish. They haul away clay jars of soy sauce, of pickled vegetables, of preserved eggs. They take bolts of cloth, bundles of kindling, sacks of coal. They destroy what they cannot carry, smashing jars, overturning crates, letting the food rot in the streets where the dogs will feast on it for days. The laundries. These are burned. The Chinese laundries that once steamed with clean cotton, that once pressed the shirts and the trousers of Torreón's businessmen, are set alight. You watch the flames climb the wooden walls, watch the steam rise from the wet clothes still hanging on the lines, watch the smoke billow into the morning sky. The fire spreads to neighboring buildings. A Mexican-owned shop catches. Then another. Then another. The restaurants. Red lacquered tables overturned. Hanging lanterns smashed. The mahjong tiles scattered across the floor, crunching underfoot. And in the kitchen, a fire that will consume the whole building. The Chinese Club. A gathering place, a community center, a home away from home for men who have left their families 10,000 miles away. They played cards here. They gambled gently for small stakes. They drank tea and spoke of home. Now it is gutted, its interior torn apart, its treasures stolen or destroyed. The gardens and the orchards. Chinese farmers are killed in the fields, in the early morning hours, before they even know the city has fallen. The Maderistas ride through the rows of vegetables, slashing at the plants with their machetes, trampling the carefully tended earth. The food that fed Torreón rots in the sun. The tram line. The Chinese-built, Chinese-operated tram that connects Torreón to Gómez Palacio is derailed, its cars overturned, its tracks torn up. The connection to the outside world is severed. By the time it is over, the Chinese community has been destroyed. The Chinese bank, looted. 40 grocery stores, destroyed. For laundries, burned. 5 restaurants, gutted. 33 food stands, demolished. The gardens and the orchards ruined. The club and the community center gone. The wealth of a generation erased in 10 hours. And then the killing begins. You cannot look away. You cannot unsee it. The mob chases the Chinese through the streets. They are not soldiers, they are civilians, merchants and workers and housewives who have joined the slaughter because something in them has snapped, because the permission granted by Jesus C. Flores 8 days ago has finally found its expression. They are joined by Maderista soldiers, some of whom participate eagerly, some of whom look away, some of whom try and fail to restore order. The Chinese run, but there is nowhere to go. The city is surrounded. The mob controls the streets. Those who flee into the desert are ridden down by horsemen, their bodies dragged back to the city like trophies. You see a man young, perhaps 20, wearing the simple clothes of a laborer, grabbed by his queue, the long braid that marks him as Chinese. The mob drags him through the streets, the skin tearing from his neck, until he falls. Then they set upon him with machetes, with clubs, with anything sharp or heavy that comes to hand. When they are done, he is unrecognizable. You see a woman, a Chinese woman, married to a Mexican man, her children watching from a doorway, pulled from her home and stripped in the street. The mob tears off her clothes, humiliates her, then kills her. The children are left screaming. You see an old man, a merchant, a man who spent 40 years building his shop, who survived famine and migration and 1,000 small cruelties, burned alive in his own store. His screams carry through the open doorway until they stop. The mob does not discriminate. The Chinese Merchants and Laborers Society told them not to resist, and they obey that advice, but it does not save them. Men who hide in cellars are found and dragged out. Men who try to surrender are cut down. Men who run are caught and killed. There is no mercy for the Chinese. A revolutionary commander named Benjamin Argumedo is said to have fired the first shot, the first killing. But within minutes, it no longer matters who started it. Everyone is killing. Soldiers and civilians, men and women. The mob has become a single organism, a beast with 1,000 heads, and it feeds. You see the bodies. They lie in the streets, in the gutters, in the doorways of the shops that were once their livelihoods. Some are whole. Most are not. The mob mutilated its victims, cutting off limbs, severing heads, disemboweling the dead. This was not efficiency. This was rage given physical form, hatred made tangible. The final count, when it is finally tallied, will be 303 Chinese dead. 5 Japanese are also killed, mistaken for Chinese in the frenzy. The mob could not tell the difference and did not care. Half the Chinese community of Torreón, dead in 10 hours. Across the river, in Gómez Palacio, a woman named Edith Wagner watches. She is not Chinese. She is German or perhaps Austrian. The records differ. She is married to a businessman in Gómez Palacio, and she has made a life for herself in this dusty corner of Mexico. She keeps a diary. She writes letters to friends and family far away, describing her life in this strange land, the heat and the dust and the colorful characters she encounters. Now she writes about something else. The entrance of the revolutionaries, she writes. I watched from my window as they came into the city. There was firing in the streets. At first I thought it was celebration, the excitement of victory. But then I saw what they were doing. The Chinese were being dragged from their homes. The shops were burning. The screaming. She does not finish the sentence. Edith Wagner's letters are among the few first-hand accounts of the massacre. She was there, on the periphery, watching through the window as a community was destroyed. She did not intervene. She could not have. But she recorded what she saw, and her words survived, and they tell us what it was like to witness this horror. Later, she will write about the aftermath, about the bodies carried away on carts and buried in mass graves, about the silence that fell over the city, the silence of complicity, of a population that knew what had happened and chose not to speak of it, about the Chinese survivors who fled north, who boarded trains with nothing but the clothes on their backs, who left Torreón behind and never returned. Her letters are a testament. They are a record. They are a refusal to let the silence win. By mid-afternoon, the killing has stopped. Not because the mob has run out of victims. There are still Chinese people alive in Torreón, hiding in basements, sheltered by sympathetic neighbors, curled up in closets praying for the nightmare to end. But Emilio Madero, the commander who led the Maderista forces into the city, has finally acted. He posts a proclamation. It is written in Spanish, printed on rough paper, nailed to walls and lampposts throughout the city. It decrees the death penalty for anyone who kills a Chinese person. It commands the soldiers to restore order. It threatens punishment for those who loot, who burn, who destroy. You see the proclamation being read aloud in the plaza. A soldier with a ragged voice shouts the words to the crowd. Some listen, some do not, but gradually, fitfully, the violence ebbs. Why did Madero wait so long? The tribunal that will convene tomorrow will ask this question. Why did he not post the proclamation when his forces first entered the city? Why did he allow 10 hours of killing and burning before he acted? Madero has his answers. He was busy directing the military occupation. He was dealing with the surrender of the federal forces. He did not know what was happening in the streets. He trusted his men to maintain discipline. But 300 people are dead. Half a community is destroyed, and no amount of explanations can bring them back. May 15, 1911. Later that afternoon, Emilio Madero convenes a military tribunal. He has no choice. The international implications of this massacre are already becoming clear. China will demand reparations. Foreign powers will ask questions. Mexico cannot appear to condone the murder of 300 civilians. The tribunal meets in a large room, perhaps a schoolhouse or a municipal building. The windows are open to the heat, and flies buzz lazily in the corners. The judges sit at a long table, Mexican army officers in dusty uniforms, their faces grim. The accused are brought forward. Soldiers, mostly. Men who led the mob or participated in it or stood by while others killed. They give their testimonies. They describe what they saw, what they did not do. And they lie. They say the Chinese fired first. They say the Chinese were armed, were dangerous, were threatening the revolutionary forces. They say they acted in self-defense. This is the story that will persist for decades. That the Chinese provoked the massacre. That they deserved what they got. That the mob was merely defending itself. But a man named Arthur Bassett has been sent to investigate. He is American, a lawyer, a diplomat, an emissary of the State Department. He is not Chinese, but he has no reason to lie. And he has evidence. Bassett makes 3 arguments. First, the Chinese were docile. The circular from the Merchants and Laborers Society proves it. They were told not to resist, and they obeyed. The federal general's story about distributing weapons is a fabrication. Second, anti-Chinese prejudice predated the massacre. The speeches, the demonstrations, the vandalism, all of it points to a community that was targeted, that was scapegoated, that was marked for destruction long before May 15th. Third, General Logero fled because he lacked ammunition. He did not supply the Chinese with weapons. He abandoned them, and the mob knew it. The evidence is overwhelming. The tribunal cannot ignore it. And so, for once, in a case involving violence against minorities, justice is not entirely denied. The survivors flee. Some are wounded, their bodies torn by machetes and bullets, their clothes soaked in blood. Some are whole but traumatized, their eyes hollow, their hands trembling. Some are children, orphaned in a single day, their parents left behind in the streets or the mass graves. They go north, mostly, toward the American border, toward the railways that will carry them to safety. They board trains in Torreón if the station is still running, if the tracks have not been too badly damaged, and they ride north to the border towns of Ciudad Juarez or Nogales. From there, some go to the United States, to the Chinatowns of Los Angeles and San Francisco. Some return to China, crossing the Pacific to a homeland they left decades ago, hoping to find peace in a country they no longer recognize. Others go south and east to the larger cities of Mexico, to Mexico City or Guadalajara or the port of Veracruz, where Chinese communities still exist, where they might find work and shelter and the company of their own kind. They carry nothing but what they can hold. They leave behind their shops and their homes and the bodies of their relatives. And some, a handful, are sheltered by the locals. You must not forget this. Not everyone participated in the massacre. Not everyone stood by while the killing happened. A few, a very few, opened their doors to the Chinese, hid them in their homes, saved their lives at the risk of their own. One such man is a lumberyard owner in Torreón. He sees the mob coming, sees the Chinese family next door about to be dragged from their home, and he acts. He pulls them inside, hides them in the back room, tells the mob, when they come knocking, that he has seen no Chinese, that they fled hours ago. The mob moves on. The family survives. Small acts of courage in the midst of atrocity. They do not erase the massacre, but they matter. The news reaches China, and the Qing Empire, or what remains of it, is outraged. In June 1911, just weeks after the massacre, China demands reparations. 100,000 pesos for every Chinese person killed. 300 families, 300 demands, 30 million pesos total. In today's money, that would be millions and millions of dollars. There are rumors that China will send a gunboat, a warship, crossing the Pacific, appearing off the coast of Mexico, demanding justice with cannon and marines. The rumor does not come true. China is in no position to wage naval warfare against a foreign power. The Qing Empire is collapsing, the Xinhai Revolution is about to begin, and within months the dynasty will fall. But the threat is enough. By 1912, negotiations are underway. Mexico agrees to pay 3 million pesos in gold, a fraction of the original demand, but still a significant sum. Francisco Madero is still president. The agreement is signed. The indemnity will be paid. But then, in February 1913, Francisco Madero is assassinated. General Victoriano Huerta seizes power in a coup, and Mexico descends into civil war once more. The new government has other priorities: survival, consolidation, the fight against the constitutionalists, and the indemnity is forgotten. The indemnity is never paid. Not 1 peso. China will try again years later through diplomatic channels. The Republic of China, now firmly established, will raise the issue at various points in the 20th century. Each time it goes nowhere. Each time the massacre is relegated to a footnote, a curiosity, a story that no one wants to remember. 300 people dead. 30 million pesos demanded. 3 million agreed. 0 paid. The survivors who return to Torreón find a changed city. The Chinese quarter is gone. The shops are ruins. The bank is an empty shell. The streets that once bustled with Cantonese voices are now silent. Other businesses have moved in, Mexican merchants mostly, and they do not speak of what happened. The Chinese are gone, and the city has moved on. No one is prosecuted. The tribunal convenes, the evidence is heard, but the punishments are negligible. A few soldiers are sentenced to prison terms. A few officials are removed from office. But the men who led the mob, the men who gave the orders, the men who did the worst of the killing, they are never found or never charged or never convicted. The silence is official. There are no monuments. The massacre is not taught in schools. The anniversaries pass without comment. When scholars try to research what happened, they are discouraged, threatened, ignored. The local narrative becomes fixed. It was a confused time, a period of revolution, and bad things happened to bad people or to no one at all. In the 1930s, as anti-Chinese sentiment sweeps through Mexico, a wave that will eventually result in the expulsion of most of the Chinese population, the massacre is cited as evidence that the Chinese never belonged, that they were always outsiders, that their presence was always resented. The victims become the villains in the story that Mexico tells itself. And when someone tries to commemorate the dead, the city resists. In 2007, a statue is erected in a public park. It depicts a Chinese family, a man, a woman, a child, standing together, looking toward the future. It is an attempt to remember, to acknowledge, to heal. Within months, the statue is vandalized. His faces are scratched out. His base is defaced with slurs. Eventually, it is removed. Commemorative plaque is stolen. A memorial service is disrupted. This is how Mexico remembers the massacre of the Chinese in Torreón. By forgetting. By refusing. By the silence of complicity. The year is 2021, 110 years after the massacre. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the President of Mexico, travels to Torreón. He comes to ask forgiveness. Not for himself. He was not alive in 1911. He had no part in the massacre. His government bears no direct responsibility for what happened. But he comes as a representative of Mexico, of the Mexican state, of the continuity of power that stretches back through a century of revolution and counter-revolution, of dictatorship and democracy, of silence and denial. He stands in the plaza where the Chinese community once gathered, where the bank once stood, where the bodies were piled before being carried to the common graves. He reads a statement. He bows his head. He asks forgiveness for what was done. The Chinese community, what remains of it, perhaps 1,000 people in a city of 1 million, watches. Some are moved. Some are skeptical. Some are angry that it took 110 years for their pain to be acknowledged. One survivor's son, a 90-year-old man named Antonio Lee Chires, speaks to a reporter afterward. His father survived the massacre, hidden by a Mexican neighbor. He says the apology is important, that it should have happened long ago, that it is a step forward. But he also says, the community is not requesting it. They have lived with this for a century. They have built their lives in the silence, in the shadow of what was done to them. They do not need the apology, but they will accept it. And then he says something that echoes in your mind. It has to be positive, he says, because this was an outrage that nobody ever admitted. You stand in the present day, in a city that does not remember, and you feel the weight of what has been lost. What remains of the Chinese community in Torreón today? You walk through the streets where the massacre happened, where the bank was looted and the laundries burned and 300 people died. The buildings are different now, newer, modern, unrecognizable. The population has grown from tens of thousands to over 1 million. The railways still run, but they are operated by the government, not by Chinese merchants. The trams are gone. There is a small Chinese community, perhaps 1,000 people, living in Torreón today. They are mostly descended from those who stayed or who returned or who came later in the 20th century. They have their associations, their restaurants, their shops. They do not speak of the massacre. They do not speak of what was lost. But they are there. They survived. They endured. And in the archives, in the records, in the testimonies of witnesses like Edith Wagner, the story survives. 303 dead. Half a community erased in 10 hours. And the silence that followed, the silence that persists to this day, the silence that almost won. Almost. But not quite. Let your mind drift back to the beginning, to the city in the desert, to the morning heat and the smell of dust and wood smoke. You were there in that moment before the violence, before the hatred, before the terrible silence that would fall. You saw the Chinese community at its height, prosperous, industrious, alive with the energy of people who had crossed an ocean to build a new life. You saw Kang Yue step off the train in 1906, the philosopher king, dreaming of a utopia in the desert. You saw him invest, encourage, believe. You saw the Chinese merchants count their coins on the abacus. You saw the laundry steam in the morning sun. You saw the bank with its brass lanterns, its ornate facade, its promise of stability. You saw the revolution come and the hatred with it. You saw Jesus see Flores speak his poison, and the mob take up the cry. You saw the siege, the fall, the 10 hours of terror. You saw the bodies, the flames, the silence. You saw the survivors flee, the indemnity fail, the cover-up succeed. You saw the apology come, 110 years late, inadequate but necessary. And now you return to the present, to the city that does not remember, to the community that endures. You carry their story with you. You are the memory. Sleep now. Let the desert wind carry you away. Stanford Digital Repository, https://pearl stanford.edu/hw538xb4240. A fact blog, primary source compilation, https://ofakv.home/005/15-hours-in-Torreon-the-Mexican-Revolution. Daniel R. Jennings primary sources, http://danielrjennings.org/lamatanza, htm. The Guardian 2021 https://www.theguardian.com/world/2021/May/16/Mexico-Chinese-Massacre-Centenary-Torreon. Wilfley and Bassett, Memorandum on the Law and the Facts in the Matter of the Claim of China against Mexico, 1911. You must understand the weight of their history. In the Guangdong province of southern China, in the villages and towns along the Pearl River Delta, a tradition of migration had been developing for centuries. The men of Guangdong were merchants, sailors, adventurers. They crossed the South China Sea to Southeast Asia, to the Philippines, to Vietnam, to Malaysia. They built communities in every port, every trading hub, every place where commerce created opportunity. They called themselves the Tangren, the people of Tang, the dynasty that had ruled China when contact with the outside world first began to flourish. When gold was discovered in California in 1848, the Tangren went west. They crossed the Pacific to San Francisco, they crossed the continent to the mining camps, they built the railroads that would bind America together. They faced violence, discrimination, exclusion. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 stopped all Chinese immigration to the United States for 60 years. But still they came, still they built, still they survived. In Torreón, they found something unique. This was not just another trading post, another way station on the road to somewhere else. This was a place where the Chinese could build, could invest, could put down roots. The desert was harsh, but it was also empty. Empty of the prejudices that had followed Chinese migrants everywhere else. Empty of the legal restrictions that prevented them from owning property, from operating businesses, from marrying whom they chose. Kang Yue saw this. He saw the potential. And so, in the years between 1906 and 1911, the Chinese community of Torreón flourished. You see it now in the records that survive. The bank was established in 1904, capitalized at 100,000 pesos, an enormous sum for the time. It accepted deposits from Chinese merchants across the region, made loans to businesses, issued letters of credit that allowed traders to operate across borders. The grocery stores, the abarotes, were the backbone of the community. They sold everything a household needed: rice and noodles, soy sauce and sesame oil, dried fish and preserved vegetables, tea and sugar and flour. They gave credit to their customers, they delivered to their doors, they knew every family in their neighborhood by name. The laundries, the lavanderias, were a revelation. In a time before machines, when washing clothes was hours of hard labor, the Chinese laundries offered a miracle. Clean clothes pressed and folded for a few coins. The Mexican women who might otherwise have spent their days at the washboard found time for other work, other lives. The restaurants served food that was neither Chinese nor Mexican but something new, something hybrid: chili and ginger, corn tortillas and steamed buns. The flavors of two worlds merged on a single plate. The tram connected Torreón to Gómez Palacio, and the trams ran on time and the tickets were cheap. This was what was destroyed in 10 hours. This was what can never be rebuilt. You must speak of the marriages. The Chinese men who came to Mexico were overwhelmingly unmarried. They had left their wives and children in China, promising to return when they had made their fortunes. Some did return. Many did not. The years stretched into decades, and the separation became permanent. In Torreón, some Chinese men married Mexican women. This was not unusual. Mexican society was stratified by race and class, and intermarriage between groups was common, especially among the lower classes. The children of such unions, the mestizos, were considered Mexican, regardless of their ancestry. But the Chinese-Mexican families were different. They faced suspicion from both sides. The Chinese community regarded them as compromised, as half-bloods who would dilute the purity of the Tang. The Mexican community regarded them as foreigners, as Orientals, as people who would never truly belong. And yet the families existed. They raised children. They attended church. They celebrated Mexican holidays and Chinese holidays and the birthdays of grandparents who lived in Guangdong and whom they would never meet. You see one such family now. A Chinese man named Li, his Mexican wife Consuelo, their 3 children running in the dusty street outside their home. The children have their father's eyes, their mother's dark hair. They speak Spanish at home, but they are learning Cantonese from their father, who sings them songs in a language they do not fully understand. In 1911, this family will be torn apart. Some of the children will survive, hidden by neighbors, protected by the fact that they look more Mexican than Chinese. They will grow up as orphans, or as the charges of distant relatives. And the memory of their parents, the love story, the cross-cultural marriage, the children who might have been, will be erased like everything else. After the massacre, the Chinese community of Torreón never recovered. Some survivors returned in the years that followed. They found their shops destroyed, their bank emptied, their neighbors hostile. Many left again for good, seeking safety in other cities or other countries. The Mexican Revolution ground on until 1920, and then until 1929, and then until 1940. The country was never stable. The economy was never secure. And anti-Chinese sentiment, far from fading after the massacre, only intensified. In the 1920s and 1930s, a wave of expulsion swept through Mexico. State governments, especially in the north, where the Chinese population was most concentrated, passed laws prohibiting Chinese from operating certain businesses, from owning property in certain areas, from marrying Mexican citizens. The rhetoric of Jesus C. Flores had become official policy. The Chinese were scapegoated for economic problems they had not caused. They were blamed for unemployment, for poverty, for the general misery of a country that could not govern itself. Politicians who wanted to deflect criticism found easy targets in the Chinese merchants, the Chinese launderers, the Chinese restaurant owners. And when the politicians spoke, the mob listened. In 1936, the governor of Sonora, Bud Agazan, called for the expulsion of all Chinese from his state. Similar demands were heard in Sinaloa in Baja California, in the states where Chinese communities had taken root. Most Chinese left. They went to the United States or returned to China or moved to the large cities Mexico City, Guadalajara, where the pressure was less intense. By 1940, the Chinese population of Mexico had been reduced by half. The Chinese community of Torreón, such as it remained, was a shadow of what it had been. Let us speak of the records. The Torreón Municipal Archive holds what it holds. Photographs of the city before the massacre, photographs of the city after. The photographs of the dead. There are photographs of the dead, posed with their killers, grinning beside the bodies, trophies of a massacre that the city would rather forget. The photographs are kept in boxes in the basement of the municipal building, behind a door that is sometimes locked and sometimes not. Scholars who have requested access have been turned away, or given partial access, or forced to pay fees that make research difficult. The names of the dead are not recorded. Not officially. The municipal records list the Chinese who died as Chinese persons, without names, without ages, without families. They were not considered important enough to identify. But the scholars persist. A historian named Carlos Castañón has spent years in the archive, sifting through the records, trying to find the names. He has found some. He has found the merchant's wife Consuelo, and the laundry owner named Wang, and the farmer who grew tomatoes in the garden behind his house. He has found the children who died, their ages recorded in the baptismal records of the Catholic Church. The work continues. It will take years, perhaps decades, to compile a complete list. But Castañón believes it is important. The dead deserve names. The dead deserve to be remembered as individuals, not as a statistic. 303, he says. That is not a number. That is 303 human beings who lived and worked and loved and died, and whose names have been erased. He will find them. You have been in Torreón for a long time. You have watched the city rise from desert sand. You have watched a community build and prosper. You have watched the philosopher arrive and depart. You have watched the hatred grow. You have watched the massacre. You have stood in the plaza where the bank once stood, where the bodies were piled. You have walked through the ruins of the grocery stores, the ashes of the laundries. You have heard the screams. And now you must leave. The desert night is falling. The stars are emerging, one by one, over the Sierra Madre. The air is cooling, finally, after the brutal heat of the day. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounds. The iron horse that built this city, still running, still carrying passengers to places they need to go. You think of Kang Yue, the philosopher who believed in Torreón, who invested in its future. You think of his dream, the utopia he wanted to build in the desert. What would he think if he could see what happened? What would he think of the hatred, the violence, the silence? You will never know, but you carry his dream with you and the nightmare and the story of what was lost. You are the memory now. You will remember what Mexico chose to forget. Let the wind carry you away. Let the stars watch over you. Let the desert keep its secrets for a little while longer. Sleep, dreamer. Tomorrow the city will wake. The trains will run. The people will go about their lives, unaware of the ghosts that walk among them. But you will know. You will always know. Now the wind carries you through the empty streets where the Chinese bank once stood. You see the ghosts of those who built this place, who believed in a future here. You see Kong Yue walking through the desert dust, dreaming of what could be. You see the merchants counting their coins, the laundresses pressing clothes, the children playing in the streets between two languages. And then you see it all burn. The flames against the morning sky, the mob with their torches and their hatred, the bodies in the streets, the silence that fell after, the silence that has never really lifted. 303 people. 303 names that were erased. 303 families destroyed in 10 hours. This is what happened in Torreón in May 1911. This is what Mexico chose to forget. And this is what we must remember so that it never happens again to anyone, anywhere. The desert wind rises. The stars will overhead. The train whistle sounds one last time, and then there is only silence. Sleep now. Dream of the city that was. Dream of the city that might have been. Dream of what we can learn from the dead, if we are willing to listen. Good night.